Introduce Dr. Joseph Lutz. He received his PhD from the University of Kentucky, specifically our pharmaceutical sciences program in 2014. His research focused on neuroprotective natural products against nicotinic receptors for alcohol-induced neurotoxicity. From our program, he went to complete his postdoctoral training at University of Illinois, Chicago, where he worked in the human addiction psychopharmacology lab. And then he decided to make his way back to the University of Kentucky, where he is now the Director of Postdoctoral Affairs. So very glad to have you with us this morning, even though it's a very small group. So I think it'd be fun to just start with, tell us about your journey.
Sure. I mean, you kind of described the what's on paper for it. But yeah, as Evan mentioned, I got my PhD at the College of Pharmacy, and so I had two co-advisors, Dr. Littleton and Dr. Pauly. And my project focused on nicotine receptors in the context of alcohol neurotoxicity. And so a lot of that was very benchtop type of work. I was extracting hippocampi from neonatal rats, cutting slices and looking at neurotoxicity in those models, and trying to prevent neurotoxicity using flavonoids, specifically a natural product that we found to be targeted at nicotine receptors. And when I actually moved on to a postdoc, it was a bit of a big leap for me scientifically, because I went on to do human addiction behavioral research. And so I was part of the Human Addiction Psychopharmacology Lab, which for short we called it the Happy Lab. And this is where we did experiments looking at the effects of drugs on behavior. So for those who are in the drug abuse field will recognize the model that we were trying to translate into humans. And so we were working on condition-placed preference. So condition-placed preference is a model that is commonly used in animals to determine the rewarding properties of drugs. The idea is that you train an animal and you give them a rewarding drug in one environment, and you give them a placebo or saline in another environment, and you do this over several sessions. And then after you've trained them, you open up both environments, and what will inevitably happen is that the animal will spend more time in the environment where they receive the rewarding drug. This is extensively used in drug abuse research in preclinical settings. I believe that we actually do it, it's done in the College of Pharmacy in some labs that study drug abuse and rewarding drugs. My postdoc was focused on creating that same experiments in humans. So it was a bit of a leap from, dissecting hippocampal rat brains to giving alcohol and amphetamines to humans in a human laboratory lab, in a human laboratory setting. So we recruited people to come and volunteer for these experiments. We would obviously pay them as research subjects. And we had a setup with 2 rooms across the hall from one another, exactly the same setup as in the animals. And they would come in for a number of sessions, and they would get a rewarding drug in one environment and a placebo in the other environment. And we were trying to see if we could emulate this experiment. We were actually successful in doing this, and my postdoc PI, Dr. Emma Childs, had done some previous work on this and was really kind of building it up. It was an interesting transition for me too, because not only did I move kind of experimental setups in a sense, I was also helping her set up her lab from scratch. She had just started as a junior faculty at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and took me on as a postdoc to really help her through this transition. And I'll touch a little bit on how that helped me get to where I am now. But the scientific shift was entirely an enormous scientific shift, because during my PhD, I was focused on alcohol neurotoxicity, and so I knew the drug abuse literature really well. And here I was just really transitioning to another method, but I was still looking at alcohol research and nicotine dependence and those kinds of questions. So I did that for 4 years. And during my postdoc, one thing that I told Emma when I started there is that I always value getting involved with the community. And you can ask Katina, who can attest to this. When I was a graduate student in the College of Pharmacy, I was always involved with the AAPS chapter. And we actually got an award that was one of the years that I was there. And so that kind of work was always really important to me. And I found out retrospectively that it was doubly important when I became a postdoc, because a postdoc can be very isolating in the sense that you don't have a cohort of graduate students with you. You don't have committees. You don't have a DGS. You don't have kind of that infrastructure that really brings you together. And so I told Emma I want to be part of the postdoctoral association at UIC even before I started. And she was like, absolutely, that's not a problem. This is a great opportunity for you. And so throughout my whole postdoc, I was part of the executive committee of the Postdoctoral Association. And my leadership style at the time was more sitting in the back seat and helping I like to help from the backstage and be part of a committee and be part of a group helping, and never kind of took the limelight in the sense that I didn't take a president position or any kind of those. But during my postdoc, there came a very critical time where the Postdoctoral Association was dwindling, in the sense that a lot of people were moving on to other positions, other jobs. And so there was a bit of a trough, and it was an opportunity for me to come in. And I was still at UIC, and I had no plans to leave at the time. And I became the president of the Postdoctoral Association. It was really interesting to kind of shift from the backstage to the front stage and be the face of the organization. And one of the first things that I was involved in that context is organizing a large career symposium. What that entailed, it was a whole day with a number of professionals from the Chicago area who came to talk about their jobs. And this was primarily focused on jobs outside of academia. And the reason that we did this is that there was a need, there was an ask for it. A lot of our postdocs, especially in Chicago, were really looking for what we call alternative careers, which in actual fact, if you look at the numbers, they're not the alternative careers, because by and large, most PhDs and postdocs go on to not become a faculty member. Anyway, so that was kind of putting things under my belt during my postdoc. And through that organization, we also advocated for a Office of Postdoc Affairs be created at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And we were successful in doing this. And so some funding was set aside for this office within the Office of Research. And since I was already kind of doing this on a volunteer basis, I thought I should apply. And I did, and I was lucky and successful to get that position. So I was the inaugural director of the postdoc office at UIC, and did that for a year before coming down here to start one here. And I'll talk about this transition in a minute. The other contributing factor that pushed me in this direction, there's two other contributing factors. One was towards the end of my postdoc, my PI was running out of funding. And so there was, while stressful, it was also an opportunity to start kind of expanding the role that I was taking as a postdoc within my department. And one need that needed to be filled was, there was a group of human subject researchers who did primarily functional MRI studies, who were looking for a program manager who had both the scientific understanding of what they were doing, but also the managerial and organizational skills to help corral all of their research assistants, help them with their functional MRI pipeline, help them with their recruitment numbers. And they were working as a consortium. So we had 5 faculty PI who work together, and this is much more common in this kind of setup because functional MRI setups are really expensive in terms of data pipeline. Once you get the images, you need to process them, and so for each lab to have their own setup didn't make sense. So I got involved as a postdoc on a 2/3 and 3/3, 2/5 and 3/5 schedule, where I was working 2 days for my postdoc PI and then 3 days for this group, and I was helping them get their stuff together, essentially. And so I became a program manager for that. And that really helped me build those organizational skills to go in and apply for that Director of Postdoc Affairs positions at UIC, because it was recognized as soft skills that I wouldn't necessarily have received during my scientific training. So that's kind of how I sinuously made my way to more of an administrative position in terms of career and professional support for trainees, focusing primarily on postdocs. 3 months after I started that job at UIC, my wife, who has a similar scientific background to mine, although she's always been in the human subject research realm, and her training has been always with humans. She got recruited to become an assistant professor here in the Department of Psychology. So I learned 3 months after I started this job. I'm out of the scientific training pipeline. I'm very excited. I'm loving it. And then I learned that we're moving within 9 months. And so that was a bit of, I kind of had to think on my feet. And so that's the second factor, is that my family was part of this transition too. And so we had to think fast. And so one of the first things that I did is actually reach out to the Postdoctoral Association here. And I had good experience running a postdoc association and being part of a postdoc association. So I thought, let's find out what's happening at UK for postdocs. And so I reached out to them, and they were extremely excited to hear this. And they were very forthcoming and very quickly connected me with the dean of the grad school here, Brian Jackson at the time, who had it on his docket to create a postdoc office, and just hadn't had the momentum for it, or the impetus, or the stars aligning for it. And me coming here as a spouse of a junior faculty was just the alignments of the stars that he needed to convince people to create this position. So through some conversations, I actually was invited to come and do an interview here, which was really kind of easy and low cost, because we were coming back to visit my wife's family who lives here. She's originally from here, and so my mother-in-law lives here, and so we would come. And so at Thanksgiving, I remember this was Thanksgiving, I came, we had a discussion, and then in April the next year, I was invited for a whole day interview and met a lot of people here and talked about my vision for this office and what we would do. So that's kind of a long and sinuous way of describing my path and my journey to where I am now. And to give you a little bit of a sense of what I do here, it is slightly different than my previous position at UIC, in the sense that here I have more of an administrative role. My previous position was entirely focused on career and professional development support, which meant creating opportunities for postdocs to network, to enhance some of their skills, the transferable skills, opportunities for career diversification, understanding that there's a lot of jobs out there for postdocs, et cetera, et cetera. Here, my job is kind of split between an admin part, which I don't really talk much about, but it does take some time. And what that is a lot of paperwork, making sure that the postdocs we hire actually have terminal degrees, for example. This is a thing, right? We don't want to get someone with an undergraduate degree into a postdoc position, for example. So that is a role that I've spent a lot more time expanding in the last 2 years. But the career and professional development support is still one of the primary functions of my office. One thing that was not written into my job description, but I made it part of my job and part of my office, is a community building aspect. And so this is kind of a decision that I made through my own experiences and understanding that a postdoc can be isolating. And so really kind of break those barriers to make sure that postdocs understand that they're not alone at this institution, and that they have other resources and peer support that they can rely on to continue their current work or transition to other type of work, et cetera, et cetera. I'll stop here for my journey and stop rambling on and answer any other question you may have.
We're rambling on at all. I always love hearing all the details. I'm sure that's definitely helpful for people who are interested in pursuing an administrative role. And following that line of thought, so as an administrator in this particular position, how would you describe your schedule? Like take us through your average day or week.
Hectic would be a way that I describe it. No, it's ever changing. So there's no prescriptive way my schedule is. I kind of look at every week as a new week, and I'm sure that other administrators here can attest to that. But a lot of is what's my day to day. One thing that I did not realize when I got into this line of work is how much email I would be doing. And so that is one thing that I like to warn people who are interested in this. You go from maybe answering 2 to 3 emails a day to probably answering closer to 50 emails a day. And so setting aside time to do this, I remember going to a time management workshop where there's actually evidence that shows this. It's like if you answer your emails throughout all day, every day, you're actually less efficient than if you do it in chunks of 1 hour in the beginning of the day, in the middle of the day, in the evening. And so I try to do this, but the way that I chunk it out more in like one whole morning is going to be dedicated to answering a lot of complicated questions that I'm getting in my email, and depending on the urgency of what's being asked. So that is one thing that, you know, building relationships and communicating through email was not something that I was prepared to do to the extent that I do today. And I'm still looking for ways to get my metrics out of Outlook, because I really want to see like the ebbs and flows of how many emails I send. And that's it's kind of digressing a little bit. One of the things that I talk a lot about with postdocs and trainees in general is like, how do you measure your productivity and how do you measure your success? If you think of academic research and academic lines of work, it's very easy. It's publications, grants, presentations, posters. You have these like kind of baked in metrics. In my line of work, it's really up to me to decide what is the measure of my success and my productivity. And so this is one where like I'm still thinking about how to measure that specifically. You know, other ways I mentioned before we started the conversation, I mentioned attrition rates as something that is really important. When I have an event, I usually have a registration set up. Career professional development events, one of the numbers that I'm paying attention to is the attrition rate. So how many people registered and how many people actually showed up. And having a low attrition rate, so most people who registered did show up, is usually a sign that I'm doing my job well. So thinking about those numbers and deliverables is something that I think a lot about when I'm delivering content to trainees, but I then turn it back onto myself and start thinking, okay, am I doing well or not? Like, I don't have those usual metrics that I was used to when I was a scientist per se. What are my new metrics and what are they? But my day to day is a lot of sitting down computer work. I do some web programming. Lots of organization, created like looking at records, emailing, and meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. Lots of meetings, talking to people, and you know, most people you'll hear complain about meetings. Actually, meetings for me are usually a good time, in the sense that a lot of my meetings are with postdocs themselves. So to give you an example, one of the initiatives that I started when I came here at UK in 2019 was a peer mentoring initiative. It's now called the Career Enhancement Groups. We changed the names so that it would be more attractive to postdocs. And what that entails is meeting in groups every other week, and discussing a particular topic that postdocs are interested in. We currently have a faculty search group, so those are postdocs looking for faculty jobs. We currently have a grant writing group that meets every other week, and this is looking at grants and fellowships that postdocs are writing. We currently have a writing accountability group that basically meets to check in on progress that they've made towards manuscripts and papers. And I've also had a job search group. So that's for those looking for jobs outside of academia. And this is just to meet and talk about, you know, networking, building LinkedIn profiles, tweaking resumes for specific job ads, and so on and so forth. So these meetings are with small groups of postdocs that can range from 2 to 15 to sometimes 30. Actually, the grant writing group is really, really popular. And what we do in those groups is talk about what's going on, and then we'll review people's materials. So the grant writing group is an excellent example where people submit a specific aims page or like a short proposal, and the group as peers give feedback to that individual. This wasn't clear to me. You might want to clarify this. And this is understanding that we have a very interdisciplinary group that is not there. We're not experts in what this person is writing about. We're really focusing on the clarity of the document and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my day to day. And then occasionally doing things like this today, like talking to other constituents, and so on and so forth. One aspect that I would add is I'm involved in conversations with leadership about, policies, and I get solicited to help with things like COVID compliance, right? Our postdocs being tested and things of the sort. And so I do get roped into those on an ad hoc kind of capacity. It's in every job description you'll see other duties as assigned. That becomes bigger and bigger the longer you are in your position. So I hope this answers your questions.
Yeah, I would say definitely did. And then also, so what skills or experiences it prepared you most for your role? And for someone thinking about going into an administrative type career, what would you recommend doing to prepare?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I kind of alluded to this as I described my journey, but I think like building leadership skills is really critical in this line of work. Having also a good organizational skill and time management skills are really critical. My job pulls me in tons of different directions at a time. So sometimes I actually I get overwhelmed with the number of things, current ongoing things that are happening. And so ringing it in is sometimes a little tricky. So being very organized and learning how to say no to some requests too is important. But I think leadership skills and getting involved in other capacities than the ones that you would traditionally pursue as a PhD student. So being part of like AAS, AAPS chapter was critical in this. Being part of the Postdoctoral Association while I was a postdoc was critical in this. Yeah, and really building that leadership and kind of self-understanding of yourself and how you work and what makes you tick and what one of the things that contributing to my transition out of research in a technical term to this is maybe realizing that I was having less of an impact on people's lives than I wanted to, right? That one paper that you publish that gets cited like 10 times or whatever seems a little trivial as opposed to the 30-minute conversation I'm going to have with a postdoc who's struggling with something in their day-to-day, and I give them a suggestion that solves their problem and they go on and have a happier, healthier life. That was a big part. I think, I don't want to be pessimistic or negative, but I think that like the longer you are in research, the more jaded you can become of its value and who cares about what you're doing. And I think that throughout my training, I found myself in some places at some points where I was like, this is kind of pointless. That's not to say that it's not, don't get me wrong. But I think that that's a feeling that I had, and I wasn't finding the immediate impact and value that I was looking for in my life, in my work and what I wanted to do. So that was a big part in helping me transition to this position. Now, with that said, I sometimes now struggle with the significance of my work today and its impact, right? And how it's hard or easy or tricky to measure and actually see and able to communicate to others. I think that if you spoke to any postdoc on campus today, I would get a pretty good assessment, I hope. And so that makes me feel good. And so, yeah, leadership skills, organization skills, and kind of shifting your mindset on what it is that you're doing and why it matters. We're two skills and one area that's more, that's less concrete. I see that you've moved on to another device, Evan. Can you hear me? And do you have another question for me? You're muted.
Thank you. So yes, there was a blip in the Wi-Fi here and knocked me off. So so sorry I missed all of that, but another question I just wanted to ask is so if you were in a position where you had to hire someone in administration like type role, what characteristics in an ideal applicant would you be looking for? So I know you've talked about like being involved with with leadership before, but is there anything else that you really look for in an ideal applicant?
Yeah. So I would look for involvement in leadership positions for sure, to see how you've managed to corral people, get them to do things, and recruit people and bring them to things. Any kind of and it's interesting you asked me this because right now I would like to hire someone at some point. I don't currently have the budget for it, but if I was to hire like an assistant director for my office, I would actually look outside of PhDs and postdocs, because I really need someone who has more managerial skill and organizational skills that I sometimes find PhDs and postdocs not to have, because they're so focused on like this one little thing. And I was like that myself. So I did have to, what's interesting is that my postdoc, because we were doing human research, is where I developed those skills, because we were operating more like an office. We were recruiting subjects to come in, participate in studies. We had a lot of tracking that needed to be done. So anyone with that kind of experience, really kind of understanding the different, how to track people, how to understand what their path is, what you're trying to accomplish. So thinking about, for instance, our postdocs on campus, I ideally would like them all to come and participate in an orientation that I give every month, but it's not compulsory, and I can't make it compulsory, at least at this point. And so someone who can show me that they are able to do something like this and increase the number of people who attend a particular type of program or some kind of instruction background would be great. One area that I think I am lacking, that I would really encourage people who are interested in my type of work to develop, is instruction, pedagogical training, getting some kind of teaching certification, because even though I don't specifically teach, a lot of my programming has a teaching component to it, in the sense that I'm trying to achieve some kind of learning within these people. So I'm currently giving out a 4-part workshop on grant writing that's separate from the group that I have, and having that pedagogical background would really have helped me to build that curriculum and make sure that I identify and develop learning objectives that are specific to this workshop. And I think that anyone with that kind of background has a leg up on me for this type of work. Another big aspect of higher education administration is going to be big data. Institutions, especially higher administration, is really looking at data-driven decision making. And so being able to provide information in a meaningful way to decision makers is critical in our day today. And I think it's going to become increasingly critical as I move forward in my career. And so one thing that, again, I think I'm lacking to some degree, I have some experience with large data sets from my postdoc, but having, knowing how to use Tableau to make beautiful, visuals for that really tell a story about what your trainees are at, where your trainees are at, what they're doing, I think is really, really important. So having those data analysis skills are critical. And most PhDs and postdocs have a background in that. I think that it's just a shift in how to think about it. You're not chasing that p-value. You're really just looking for a story within the data. But again, when you're working with higher administration, excuse me, they're all scientifically trained too. So I think that the expectation for the type of information that you provide has to be meaningful to a scientist also. So there's this kind of this in between. So because you could think about asking someone in marketing or in communications to have those skills, but they might not understand the scientific background or angle that leaders at institutions are looking for. So data analysis skills for sure.
Right, awesome. And then also getting into a little bit more details about what you are doing currently. If you could wish that like someone had, or if you could think about what you wish someone had told you before you started here in this role, what would you think?
So the instruction piece, I wish that I had spent more time during my training to develop pedagogical skills and pedagogical expertise. Is definitely one. I think, it's an interesting question, because where my mind goes is that I wish that someone had told me that it's okay to be happy outside of research. And I never thought about it until after the fact, right? So hindsight is 2020. But I think that like when I made the transition, I had to go through a grieving process of, I'm not going to be an academic researcher. I'm no longer going to be a postdoc. I'm not going to be writing papers, writing grants, working in a lab. And there was an emotional component to that transition that was hard, because I'd spent so much time training scientifically. So I do miss talking about, KIs and nicotine receptors and subtypes and molecules and all that stuff. Although that is helpful in my job today, because I do get to interact with postdocs and scientists. And so I always ask postdocs, okay, tell me about your research, as I did you when we first got on this call. And I am able to converse in that space, and that's something that I like cherish every day. And so if I was in a completely different space, or if I worked with, say, undergraduate students, I think that I would miss this terribly. And so I wish that someone had prepared me for the reality that not everyone getting a PhD is going to go on to be a scientist in the true hard sense of, not the true, in the hard sense of the word. I apply my scientific skills every day, but it doesn't feel like this, and it doesn't feel like it's recognized by others as is. So that was a hard emotional and psychological transition. And so I wish that like people had told me, hey, it's actually normal and it's okay, and you can be just as happy and as successful in another line of work than the one that you think you were predestined for.
Awesome. And then what advice would you give for working through that grieving process? Is there anything particular that would have helped you more than other things?
Well, so start thinking about it early. So for all of you here, just open your mind a little bit more about the different possibilities outside of academia, or the path that you've set for yourself. And recognizing that a plan is a plan, and life happens, and if you're so focused on the plan and achieving what you've set your mind to, you might miss out on what is happening right now. And it's interesting, because in grad school, I lived in the moment. I did not have a plan at the time, to be honest. And I loved it. I miss it wholeheartedly. I had lots of very good friends, like the best men at my wedding I met in grad school. I still talk to them. It's just that my postdoc was a harder transition, because I started planning and I had to kind of be flexible and nimble. So just opening your mind, talking to people, talking to others, and understanding that even me, I'm a director of a postdoc office. That might sound impressive, but I still struggle with this today. I have struggled with it. I think it's normal. I think that we all kind of go through career stages. Talking to others. One thing that I always promote, and I think Rupinder, who's on the call here today, I've talked to about, is using informational interviews to really expand your understanding of the job market and the possibilities and the type of work and what it means and how it feels to, right? So really kind of getting in touch with like what is it that you're going to do day to day, and how is it going to make you feel, right? So spending a whole day running PCRs or growing bacteria in the lab or growing cells in the lab can be very meaningful work that makes you very happy, and it may not. And so really kind of connecting the two is like, me talking to you guys today for an hour makes me feel happy. So I'm happy, like I love being in this position to be able to do this. And so really trying to connect the two, and instead of trying to separate the person from the work, it's finding some kind of integration, which brings us to kind of a broader theme of work-life integration. You'll notice I don't call it work-life balance, because a balance has an implication that you have two separate entities that you're trying to weigh against one another. So that creates a tension. So it's more about thinking about work-life integration. And one thing that I will say in my line of work that I'm really grateful for is that I have a flexible schedule, and I have more time than I would had I pursued an academic research position. My wife is an assistant professor; she has less time than me, and so that's something that I am grateful in my position, is that I am able to kind of give myself more time and integrate my life and my work together.
Awesome. And I think you are also in a very unique position to answer this next question. So how have you seen the institution of the postdoc change over the past several years? Because I know there's a lot of conflicting information depending on where you want to go, like if a postdoc is necessary or not. And I was wondering, like, what were your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So if you want to become a faculty member, postdoc is necessary in the hard sciences, so in STEM. In actual fact, I'm seeing more and more postdocs in softer sciences like social sciences and humanities. And I want to tell those fields, don't do it. Like you're gonna delay people's positioning into meaningful faculty jobs. And so, so it's necessary if that's the plan. If you want, and what's interesting with pharmacy is that your job market is actually broader than other disciplines, because industry is such a strong recruiter for people in the pharmaceutical sciences. You know, I know a lot of people in basic sciences like physics and biology and chemistry. Even though there are applications, their research tends to be less applicable, which really attracts them towards the academic route and limits their choices. But a postdoc is necessary for a faculty position. If you're interested in industry, I would suggest to skip the postdoc entirely, if you can. Now, with that said, I know that there's a lot of companies that are building postdoc programs. So Big Pharma has bought into this. I think AbbVie has a postdoctoral program. One thing to be mindful of those is that a lot of them have an intention, this is unclear to me, and it's harder to find information about those industrial postdoc programs. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get hired on as a scientist in that position. So that's not a guarantee, and that's something that I've heard several times. It's really focused on the scientific training and building your research portfolio. Another thing that we've seen with postdocs is that they're getting longer and longer. And in actual fact, there's a lot of pushback from institutions now to kind of limit how long they can be. So at the University of Kentucky, we have a 5-year limit on how long you can be a postdoc, including any other experience in the US. So if you've had 2 years of postdoc somewhere else, you come here, you've only got 3 years, and then you either get booted out or you get promoted to a staff scientist position. I really would urge to focus on what your plan is, as opposed to whether postdoc is necessary or not. So given your goal, you need to find out whether postdoc is appropriate or not, and really use the postdoc intentionally for that. One piece of data which was really interesting that came out maybe 5-6 years ago was showing that 80% of PhD students default to a postdoc because they don't know what they want to do. So defaulting to a postdoc is something that I would urge against, because you're just, if you decide then to move to, in a sense, I defaulted to a postdoc, and I could have been making a lot more money sooner getting into this line of work had I known what I wanted to do when I finished my PhD. So I'm a perfect example of this. And don't get me wrong, my path it's an N of one, it's my individual path, and there's lots of reasons why I took this postdocs. I was moving to be closer to my wife, who was in Chicago at the time. There's lots of things that happen in someone's life, but I would urge people not to take a postdoc without a plan as to how it's going to help them in their long-term career plans.
Awesome.
Do you have any other specific questions about the postdoc job market or anything like that?
Actually, yes. So the postdoc community sometimes can be a little scary because there's a lot of instances of abuse by mentors,
Sure.
sequestering people, not allowing them to do their own work. So how would you recommend applying for positions, trying to avoid ending up in a toxic situation?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's not foolproof, but talking to past mentees of that individual is a good way to get a sense of whether their mentoring style is going to work with you or not. So this is in recognition that, let's lay this straight first, right? So mentoring is a two-way relationship. So you have a mentor and a mentee, and you might have some toxic PIs who actually really work well for some mentees and help them push them to where they want to be. And so it depends on your objective. Now, there are really, really toxic PIs that I would never advise anyone to go work with. But the style matters. And so figuring that out before you take the job is really difficult because you can't do an internship with that person and figure out, or a rotation, right? So talking to past mentees, seeing if you align with the way that they like to be mentored, and getting a sense of what the day-to-day work in the lab is like and what the expectations are. I think it's also reasonable when you're applying and interviewing with that person to ask very clear questions about what the expectations are and make sure that they align with yours, right? So one of the things that I started doing last year is mentoring training for postdocs, and one of the modules that is critical is aligning expectations. And so it's important when you start a mentoring relationship to align expectations, but if you can do it before you start that relationship, it's even better. And one of the keys here is to make sure to say out loud what your expectations are, make sure that the PI says out loud what their expectations are, and once they're out in the open, negotiate for them to align and make sure that and more often than not, it'll be perfect because most postdocs will most candidates will take a postdoc because they want to increase the number of publications, they want to learn a new technique or a new field, and they're looking, they want to go to an annual conference every year, and most mentors that hire postdocs will want that for themselves and for the PI, for the postdoc also. But it's really a question of saying out loud and making sure that these expectations are explicit. Implicit expectations are one of the most dangerous things in any workplace, and in mentoring relationships in particular. So that would be my advice. If you're unable to get that information in your interactions with this person, that might be a red flag that tells you that it's probably not a good idea to pursue. And I know that's difficult to hear. I'm sure it's difficult to hear because you may feel like you're limited in number, like in the postdoc opportunities you can apply for, given your background, your expertise. But really think outside the box. One of the problems with postdocs is that the hiring process is not prescriptive. A lot of postdoc positions are not advertised as they should. You hear about them through the grapevine, through connections with your current mentor, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really causing problems down the line in terms of diversity and inclusion and equity for that reaches as far as faculty positions, if you ask me. And so making sure that you don't kind of get cornered into a postdoc and just agreeing to it because you think that you don't have any other options. I think turning down a position where there are enough red flags that you don't think you'll be able to manage it from a mentoring perspective is critical. Yeah, I do actually get requests from grad students who want to review, applications and interactions, and so I've got a graduate student in communication who reached out to me, and we had a one-on-one session where she was telling me about this faculty who's trying to recruit her as a postdoc, and she laid it out to me, told me all of the interactions, the exchanges, and it was clear that this person was exploitative and wanted to hire a postdoc and hold a visa over the head and that kind of stuff. And so it does happen, but you can be savvy, talk to other people, get other people's inputs to see what they think about the interactions that you're getting and the vibe that they might get, to get a better grasp on the situation.
Awesome.
I'm happy to do that. So if you're looking for a postdoc and you get a weird red flag where you're not sure, happy to talk through it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that advice. And the next question was, does your office provide services for grad students who are looking to start a postdoc or are in the midst of the application process?
Yeah, and it's it's not written into my job, but I'm part of the training pipeline. I'm one cog in a long list of cogs. And so I'm always happy to give my perspective, and so I'm happy to work with grad students if I have time. But yes, just shooting me an email. I don't get many requests like this, and it's not advertised on my website, for example. But I'm happy to, especially with my alma mater, I'm happy to provide those services.
Awesome. And so I know we have a small group here, but the hour's almost up, and I was wondering if anyone had any questions.
Joseph, like you said, being a postdoc can be isolating, and it's very easy just to stay in your lab and work on your stuff. What's your strategy for bringing postdocs in to participate in these sort of career development things?
Meet them where they're at, kind of. One thing that I tried during National Postdoc Appreciation Week is to actually go around departments and find postdocs in the lab to give them a free mask. And it was just interesting to see where you can find a postdoc on campus. But also, I mean, one thing, even though one of my principles is to really promote career diversity for postdocs, is I focus on what they want. So I've been actually asking this question as part of my registration for orientation for 3.5 years. So I had the same question at UIC, and I asked people what their career interests are, and I have 9 largish sectors. And by and large, 75% of our postdocs are interested in academic research, primarily academic positions, primarily research. And so I do a lot of, faculty search applications, grant writing, all those skills that you're gonna, so that I kind of cater to that content, but I infuse career diversification content in there, some mental health and content in there. I'm always open to talk about those things and talk about, and I kind of I make some plugs for those things. So I don't do, if I was to do a webinar on mental health for postdocs, no one would show up. And so, I mean, some people would show up, but they'd probably be the squeaky wheel. So really to reach a broader, isolated community like this, I try to provide things that they think are helpful for them. My other trick is I interact with their PIs. And so once or twice a year, I use this trick where I'll email every PI and say, hey, this is the one opportunity you should tell your postdocs to attend. So the symposium every year, I actually send emails to sponsoring faculties, of what I call them, who have postdocs, and I say, please encourage your postdocs to participate and attend this event. And in actual fact, what's fascinating is that a lot of postdocs choose not to go to things because they think their PI don't want them to, but this actually gives them the approval, because the PI usually will respond to me and copy their postdoc and say, hey, postdoc, go do this. And so then it's like, okay, now I'm free to do it when I thought I couldn't. And that, that brings another topic that's really, really tough, is a postdoc is intended to build independence, yet a lot of postdocs continue to act like they're students and need approval from their, your PI has no agency over your career. It's your own career. Mm-hmm. So go out there, challenge them, skip lab for an afternoon. Nothing's gonna, no fires are gonna start. It's okay.
And you said that you are not able to require your orientation. Mm-hmm. Have you thought about reaching out to colleges or units and asking if they will require new postdocs to attend?
That's a good idea. I try to avoid that because it becomes really patchwork, and so then it's really hard for me to keep track of who has to be here and who hasn't got to be here. Mm-hmm. And in all honesty, the content that I share in an orientation, if people were required to attend, they wouldn't pay. They would show up on a Zoom and they wouldn't listen. Yeah, there's an eternal battle between required and non-required things, even for students, even for grad students, because if you require it, you're not building their own resilience and their own agency in their careers, right? So it's like, you have to do this because we decided that you think that is good for you. I have 2 small children. If I tell them you have to do this, that they don't learn anything.
But you're right, it's that battle because they don't know what they don't know,
Right. Which, I think that the community building aspect for me is critical in that, in communicating what goes around and what's helpful. And I rely on postdocs who do interact with my office to then spread the word and be ambassadors of the things that I do. And so that they can be like, so if a postdoc says, oh, I'm really struggling with my diversity statement for this faculty application that I'm writing. And it's like, well, have you reached out to Joe? Because he will help you with that. And he has a group that does that. Pay attention, man. So yeah, no, that's you top-down communication only works so far. And even bottom-up communication only works so far. And so my strategy is to have as many avenues as possible and focus on the ones that I can do effectively. Good questions, Katina. Thank you.
Well, I think our time is just about up, and want to be very respectful of your time, Dr. Lutz, but thank you so much for being here and talking with us and imparting some wisdom.
I hope I did that, but thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess that is it for this conversation, and thanks again, and I will see everybody later.
Thank you, Evan. Bye, y'all.
Thank you, Joe.